Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Scientific Collaboration Across Borders. This is the fifth in our series, Working in the U.S., Career Development for International Physicists. My name is Alex Adams and I'm the APS International Programs Administrator, and I'll serve as the moderator for today's event. APS webinars are a free service of the Society, and this series is brought to you by APS Careers and APS International Affairs. The final broadcast in our series, in this series on scientific diplomacy, will be held next month. For more information, we encourage you to sign up for the mailing list at go.aps.org/APS webinars. APS membership provides benefits to physicists around the world with access to valuable career information and resources, including career guidance materials, mentoring programs for industrial physicists, and many other opportunities. Members can network with a global physics community at APS meetings and through APS unit involvement. If you're not already a member, we encourage you to consider joining the APS today at the address on the screen. APS is not only for physicists living in the US, and we work hard to serve physicists across the globe. Nearly a quarter of our membership lives outside of the United States. To expand opportunities for all students, APS offers a free one-year membership for students worldwide. APS engages with physicists globally, organizing webinars with partner societies abroad on topics such as publishing in peer-reviewed journals. APS also hosts forums and conferences for young physicists, such as the International Young Leaders Forum, as well as the Canadian American Mexican Graduate Student Physics Conference. APS advocates for scientific mobility, and there's a strong international presence at APS meetings and in APS journals. Visit the link you see on the screen to see more information about APS international engagement, including a mapping tool that will show you exactly how APS is engaged in your region. Now for a little bit of housekeeping. The presentation will be followed by a question and answer session with the speaker. And if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the Q&A panel on the lower right-hand side of your window. And I'll also turn on a live transcript that can also be turned on for your screen in the same area as that Q&A panel button. Today's presentation is being recorded and we'll be posting that within 5 business days, so keep your eyes out for that. We also ask that you share your feedback in the post-event survey upon exiting the webinar. And so with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Amy Flatten, APS Director of International Affairs, to introduce our speaker.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. And I want to echo what Alex said. APS is not just an organization for physicists in the United States. Please go to those web links that Alex said and learn how APS can have programs and opportunities for physicists all around the world, and that international engagement tool that Alex mentioned will allow you to click on a link and click on a map and find out where you are, just from where you are, how you can get involved in APS and the different things that we're doing to work with physicists in your region. So please know how much we appreciate the chance to work with physicists and serve physicists across the globe. And today, our speaker is Dr. Rebecca Spike Keiser, as you've seen advertised, and she is the Chief of Research Security Strategy and Policy at the National Science Foundation. And she is a longtime friend of the APS. And we really appreciate her being here today. Yeah, there's so many issues with international collaboration and research security that you're hearing about in the news. This is a tremendous opportunity to hear from the expert. And Dr. Keiser is the first person in this position. It was just established by the National Science Foundation in March of 2020. And it's meant to ensure, she helps ensure the security of federally funded research. And this is important, while maintaining open international collaboration. So what does she do? She provides the NSF director with policy advice on all aspects of research strategy. And she leads NSF's efforts to improve research security, and does this across the government, the White House and other federal agencies like the DOE. And talking about international collaboration, until March of 2020, until she took this job, she was also the head of the Office of International Science and Engineering. So she's very, very familiar with all of the aspects of international collaboration. But wait, there's more. Before she came to NSF, she was with NASA, and she was a special advisor to the NASA administrator and a high-level advisor on strategy and policy and many senior level roles. And she was also assistant to the director for international relations at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. And there she provided advice to the president's science advisor. And she also speaks Japanese and Spanish. And what a privilege it is for you to be able to ask her questions, which you're going to be able to do after her presentation. So with that, Dr. Keiser, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Amy. And something Dr. Flatten did not mention, but Dr. Flatten was the head of international at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy prior to me. And I had the privilege of taking on the position when Amy came over to APS. So thank you. As Amy said, I am in this position, and it is separate from my true passion, which is international collaboration. And that's on purpose, because we want to be very clear that there is a big difference between international collaboration, which is strongly encouraged and benefits the research ecosystem. And really, it's the way science happens. It's the way it's conducted. And research security issues, which often are caused by undue foreign government interference. And I'll talk to you about that difference today. I'll talk to you about international collaboration overall, and then I'll talk to you about some ways that we're looking to use NSF data to better track both international collaborations as well as research security issues. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, and go to full screen. Okay. So as I said, I'll talk about international collaboration, research security, as well as something called a Systems of Records Notice that we have out on the street. And I will tell you what that is, I promise. So first, international collaboration at NSF. So what you see now are the top 25 partner countries of NSF based on number of awards that have international activity as part of the award. The numbers maybe are not so surprising that our largest collaborator is Canada, of course, due to its proximity. And then there's Germany, UK, France, Japan, Italy, Antarctica. We run the US Antarctica program. And China. China is a large partner of NSF and United States researchers. We think this is a good thing. It's something that should continue and should be encouraged. The next chart is what we consider international collaborations as listed in NSF awards. And that means that there's active evidence that both sides are actively participating in the research itself. So the previous numbers I showed you show that there's international activity. Perhaps the NSF funded researcher is going abroad to conduct his or her research, or is attending several international conferences. This shows the numbers of those that have active international partners collaborating on the research itself. The top partners are relatively similar, however, and you can see that China the numbers have dropped quite a bit. The others have remained mainly the same. The main message is there's a lot of international collaboration happening. Most of these collaborations are from the bottom up, meaning that the US researcher has formed connections with international counterparts. They decide to do a project, And they proposed that project together to NSF as well as to the international funding agency of that partner. They do the project together. We think that that's, of course, wonderful. The background you have behind me of the two black holes was through the LIGO International Collaboration that had more than 25 countries that were part of the collaboration. That's just how science works. And we want to make sure that that continues. So again, international scientific research collaborations, they're transparent, they're exchanges for mutual benefit. We leverage complementary skills and facilities and sites and resources. And we can identify clear intellectual contributions by both sides when we exchange personnel. And we can identify the organizational affiliations and the sources of funding of everyone that's part of the research project. And of course, they benefit the scientific enterprise. And I'll show you today that improper foreign government interference is not the same thing. So in 2019, we did a study through a group called the JASON, and these are independent academic experts, most employed at US universities, who do studies for the US government in areas that cross over between national security issues and science issues. So we asked them to do a study about in open research, which is fundamental research, which is what NSF funds. Are there issues related to research security? And they answered yes, there are. I'll talk to you more then about what that means and what we're doing about it in future slides. But they also said that a way that we could address identifying the difference between improper foreign government interference and true international collaboration is by setting up a type of catechism. At DARPA, there was a famous person, Dr. Hellmeyer, who set up the Hellmeyer Catechism that asked certain questions to identify principled research projects. And the JASON suggested adapting that to come up with a catechism for international collaboration. I like to think of it as the 4 questions of Passover, being Jewish, but there are really 10 questions here. So the first question is, describe the engagement succinctly and without jargon. Is it fundamental research? And what are the institution's policies around creating that engagement? Are the terms of the engagement made clear in writing? Have all the participants been identified? And are all the participants known to the principal investigator and to the principal investigator's institution? Are all the participants' conflicts of interest and commitment documented? And are there any aspects of the engagement that are not to be disclosed? Are there any non-disclosure arrangements? And if so, why? Because we think, of course, that should be the exception and definitely not the rule about non-disclosure. Is there any aspect of the engagement that seems unusual or unnecessary or poorly specified? And where does the funding and the other resources needed for the activity come from? Is it clear what each party is providing? The next set of questions are here. Are all the tangible assets of the engagement existing or to be generated, like data, metadata? Are they known? And how are they going to be shared? And who decides how they're going to be allocated? How does a participant end their engagement? Are scholars expected to reside away from their home institutions as part of the engagement? And if so, how are they chosen for participation in the engagement? What are the reporting requirements back to home institutions or organizations? And who's going to control the dissemination of the resulting fundamental research? As you can see, these aren't complicated questions. They're questions that I think for almost all the international collaborations that I know can be readily answered. And the big thing here is if you can't readily answer it, then one has to question whether it is truly an international collaboration, and maybe more work needs to be done to find out the answers to these questions. So that goes into what we're trying to do in science and security at NSF. First of all, making sure that we maintain this great science and engineering community, which relies on collaborations globally and domestically. I can't emphasize that enough. And something that I am concerned about is that I am hearing from some researchers that they don't feel that they even want to bother with forming an international collaboration because they're not sure what the rules are and they don't want to get in trouble. I think that's very concerning, and that's something that we need to communicate more about. Again, that these are encouraged collaborations. This is the way science works. We just need to have some rules of the road here. And the rules of the road, I think, can be easily formed by answering the questions I talked about. We want to make sure that we ensure openness and transparency and reciprocal collaboration. So I used to talk about research security and science and security as protection, right? And protecting our research. Now I refer to it as maintaining our open collaborative research system. And to me, that's really what we're trying to do here. We don't want to close anything off. We just want to make sure that research integrity is maintained and that, again, we have these principles in place and well understood by all of the participants in the research system. So it's a balance. We do need some security measures in place, and I'll talk more about those, but we want to make sure we maintain this open environment. We do need to better understand the risks that we're dealing with here, as well as the scale and the scope of the issues, which is why we're putting into place analytics that I'll discuss with you. We have to take appropriate action to mitigate the risks that we identify. And importantly, like I'm doing with you all today, share knowledge and best practices and listen. I think the government needs to listen to the community. Law enforcement and the intelligence community needs to listen to the community, and they need to listen to science agencies. And we need to understand from a science agency perspective what law enforcement and intelligence community, what they're dealing with and their perspective as well. So this all matters, of course, because fundamental research, basic research, as well as applied research, all contribute to our ability to sustain our position as a leader, as our leader in the world, our leader in innovation. As we know greatly, a lot from even the statistics that APS publishes, research contributes to our economic strength and to our national security. So it's extremely important. We do need to acknowledge that there are some risks inherent, and the geopolitical situation is changing, and we need to be aware of that. That doesn't mean we can't collaborate, especially with those who are considered competitors, but we do need to understand that there are risks out there. International collaboration is key, as well as having a diverse domestic and international talent workforce here in the United States. It's our great asset, and we need to continue it. So we want to maintain this open and collaborative environment, foster collaboration, and promote core norms and values. So we have some risks, and there are risks from conflicts of interest and conflicts of commitment. And these really come from not disclosing these conflicts to one's employer, which is often a US university, or to the funding agency. And when these conflicts aren't disclosed, they can't be resolved. And then the research itself can't be trusted. And that's extremely concerning to our whole research enterprise. Breaches to research integrity, of course, very concerning. Violations of responsible and ethical conduct of research. And we are seeing, unfortunately, actions that also undermine the competitive review process. We also, of course, have actions such as non-disclosure, false statements, conflicts that aren't told to us and to the employer that negatively impact funding decisions. So NSF receives 48,000 proposals a year, and we're only able to fund about 12,000 of those. A lot of good proposals are left on the cutting room floor because of the amount of funding we have. And so it really is unfair when someone receives a grant due to incomplete or inaccurate information provided to us. And of course, actions that undermine research do threaten US leadership in emerging science and technology. That's a great threat to national security. and that divert research in critical and emerging technology areas that possibly can have dual use and could be used for military and intelligence purposes. And that's very concerning to us as well. And of course, this does threaten economic security, because economic security comes from innovation, which comes from the research that you all do. A particular concern are particular foreign government talent recruitment programs. And these are programs that are funded and run by some other governments. So we want to distinguish concerning foreign government talent recruitment programs from other programs. So there are a lot of programs out there that are designed to attract talent to a particular country. And they're principled and they're open, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with those programs. Von Humboldt Foundation, for instance, the Fulbright, et cetera. But some of these programs have contracts with very concerning clauses in them. They can stipulate quotas for publications, that you have to publish a certain number of publications per year in the highest journals, that you have to obtain a certain amount of funding for that other institution with which you have the talent recruitment program. And most of these programs, those who sign the contracts are full-time employees at US universities, and yet they're still signing these contracts with these other entities. That you're required to recruit other researchers to be part of the program. And often they stipulate the number of other researchers you have to recruit. And so as you can see, these types of programs threaten transparency and openness and integrity. And they often are not disclosed to their own US employers or to us as their funding agency. Often the foreign university affiliation is listed before the US university on publications, and that's a requirement in the contract. The large amount of research funding is for that other university and not for the US university. And there's a required number of patents that have to be filed. And when you have this kind of pressure, of course, the pressure to publish, the pressure to get funding, it also provides pressure to do things in ways that breach research integrity in order to meet these required quotas that are part of these agreements. So, of course, we focus very much on risk mitigation. Being part of one of those talent recruitment programs that I mentioned right now it's not illegal in the US. There's legislation out there that might make what they call malign foreign talent programs illegal. Right now, they're not. And one can be part of such a program as long as it's disclosed. We do have to emphasize that, being part of a federal research grant does have a lot of responsibility. And we have to uphold our core principles and values. And that means if you are part of one of those programs, you need to tell your employer and tell us that you're part of one of those programs. If everything has not been disclosed to us and to one's home institution, the errors and need to be acknowledged, and behavior should be corrected so that we can trust the research. We do have to ensure a level playing field, and that level playing field comes from proper disclosures so that all information can be evaluated through the competitive review process. And of course, we want to make sure that we protect against any improper influence and distortion of scientific knowledge. So transparency and full disclosure are essential. And I do get a lot of comments, and I just got some in the APLU conference I was part of yesterday saying this focus on full disclosure is creating a lot of administrative burden on US universities. And I completely understand that. I think what I would love to get to is a point where we're going beyond thinking about this disclosure as compliance. And we're thinking about disclosure as a necessity to make sure that we do have this level playing field and that we have research integrity in our system. And so we do have to avoid conflicts. We have to identify potential conflicts of interest and commitment. And also issues related to capacity. If a researcher does not disclose that they're part of several research grants, they don't disclose that information to us, they might not have the capacity to perform the NSF grant, and yet they're receiving this federal funding. Or there might be undue overlap or duplication between that NSF grant and others that they're receiving. We need the disclosure information also to assess qualifications of the researchers and to make sure that the team is qualified to perform the proposed project. Okay. So what are we doing to better understand the scope and scale of the issues that we're dealing with here? And what are we doing to make sure that we can secure research integrity in the system? We have put in the Federal Register, and it's out there right now, a Systems of Records notice to use data analytics. And so we are requesting to use NSF proposal and award data and analyze it, aggregate it, and compare it to open sources for several goals. And I'll talk to you about those goals on the next slide. So we have this SORN System of Records notice that's out in the Federal Register until December 9th. It's NSF 77 if you want to look it up and Google it. We welcome comments on the SORN, and you can email at this email address if you have any further questions. So the system is going to help us in many different ways. We're going to empower portfolio management. So basically, we'll have analytics so we can understand how decision criteria are impacting who is receiving an NSF award, and look at capacity and potential overlap and duplication that I talked about before between what we're being funded to do and other proposals and being funded and grants being performed. We also want to use the information to evaluate the impact and return on investment of our awards. We can use this information to analyze and better understand our international collaborations. Who are we working with across the board, and with what countries, with what entities, and again, assess the impact of those collaborations. So we also are using the information to identify inconsistencies in information, as I said. So when information is submitted to NSF, it's required that the PI and co-PI submit all information on all of their professional appointments so that we can assess qualifications, that they submit all of their collaborators and other affiliations so that we can assess conflicts of interest for peer reviewers, and to submit all sources of current and pending research support so that we can assess capacity, overlap, and duplication. And so we're able now to take what's provided to NSF, compare it to databases such as Scopus and Web of Science, and look what's in those publications, conference presentations, et cetera, and see if there's information there that is inconsistent with what was provided to NSF. When we find this information, we'll be able to then work back with the US research organization to understand the inconsistencies and understand why they're there. It could be that there were errors of omission. It could be there was a misunderstanding of NSF requirements, or it could be that there's something else happening. And that's what we're going to do, is we're going to work with the research organization to understand what's happening here. So these are the routine uses. We have to do this with which personally identifiable information is going to be used through the systems of record notice. So we're only going to share information back with an institution that has received the NSF funding. And we might share inconsistencies with other federal agencies if it's related to national and research security. And we'll do this in coordination with our Office of Inspector General. And we might share information with other S&T agencies to improve portfolio management and coordinating initiatives. Okay. I want to emphasize that when we're doing these analytics, we want to safeguard the processes as much as possible. We realize that we need guardrails and very specific rules about how we use information that's provided to NSF and make sure that we do this in an accurate and unbiased manner. So we're developing internal guidelines now. They're going to be published on our research security page, and they'll include things like making sure we have human oversight and validation of results. We're not just going to pop results out of the tool and throw them over the transom. We're going to establish thresholds and accuracy requirements for the analyses. And we will never target any particular demographic when we're using these tools. So that's really my presentation here. I'll stop sharing my screen and I welcome any questions.
Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation there, Rebecca. It looks like we've got one question here in the chat box. And as a reminder to everyone, if you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box. But the question in the chat was, if we add a collaborator to a funded project or to another project, how do we inform NSF?
So when you add a collaborator and they're an unfunded collaborator that's not funded by NSF, it is as easy as sending an email to your program officer and letting them know. And that'll be a simple email at the time you add the collaborator. And then you formally inform us in your annual report by filing, that list of collaborators with the updated collaborators in the annual report.
All right. Are there any common mistakes or missteps that you see individual scientists make when undertaking new collaborations with scientists abroad? For example, making misguided cultural assumptions that could easily be avoided.
Yeah, I think that one of the big things that I see quite a bit is assuming that we all have the same understanding of these principles that I talked about before, of what the definition of openness is, what the definition is of openly disseminating results, and what even collaboration means. And that's why I think it's not necessarily cultural misunderstandings, it's more understandings among people. When we use terms, and we might be thinking about those terms in different ways when it comes to practice. An example is we often have disagreements even between researchers who are collaborating here in the United States about how the collaborators are going to be listed in a publication. And we often have misunderstandings about the timing of the release of the research results. And sometimes then one participant in a collaboration will openly publish or release the research results. And the other collaborators weren't informed and had a different understanding of when that was going to occur. Things like that happen pretty commonly. So my best advice is, in any collaboration, domestic or international, it's extremely important to write down the rules of the road. Have your own management plan. We have an unnamed, very, very, very large international collaboration. I won't name it because there were a lot of concerns about how things were done. They got great results, but our Office of Inspector General found that these simple things that I'm talking about now, about understanding how results were going to be disseminated, and understanding roles and responsibilities within the collaboration itself, were never written down. This resulted in why our OIG got involved. It resulted in some misconduct claims, and that had to be investigated. And when what was investigated, you found nothing was written down, then everybody leaves unhappy. So I think that's my best advice.
Thank you. The next question we have here from an anonymous attendee asks, what's the best way to share unpublished work before forming a collaboration?
So I think sharing unpublished work is really, there's no one right way to do it or wrong way to do it. It just has to be something that is agreed to by everyone who is part of that research team at that time. If everybody's on the same page that they're comfortable releasing that unpublished information through putting it in an archive, putting it in a database, putting it on a website, however you wish, this is fundamental research. It should be done. If even one person, though, that's part of that research team does not feel comfortable releasing the data and the research at that time, then it shouldn't be released until everybody comes to agreement. And there might be a lot of reasons why it isn't released. Perhaps somebody on a team feels that more validation is necessary. Somebody might question the methodology. Somebody wants to do more and make the results even more robust. For whatever reason, there might be a reason to wait. So I hope that that's helpful. You know, I think when collaborators come in and things have not been released as yet, again, it's extremely important to write down and answer the questions that I talked to you about before. And be able to come to agreement then at that time about, number one, how the results are going to be disseminated. Number two, if there had been research that had been done before the collaborator came in, how are you going to acknowledge the research that's done through authors, co-authors, and other acknowledgements when a publication is done? It's amazing how many arguments there are about that at the end because it wasn't decided at the beginning of the research project, and all sorts of other things. So it's just important to work all these things out. Amy and I are experts at doing this at the government level because we've had to negotiate so many international agreements. And it's amazing how many of these international agreements, it really comes down to things like the data sharing clause and, you know, how the data are going to be shared. And that's the big holdup. Or the other one is who is going to be designated the project or the program lead and who's going to be under that as the sub lead. Those are the kinds of things that might hold something up, but they have to be worked out in advance.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Alan Hurd. Will you address joint appointments? For example, can NSF fund a non-US scientist employed by a non-US institution, but affiliated with a US institution as a joint appointee?
Sure. So the NSF awards actually go to the institution and not to the individual. And in almost all the cases, the institutions are US institutions. We do have ways where a non-US institution can receive NSF funding, but it has to be strongly justified about why the US institution cannot perform that award. The US institution designates who the principal investigator and co-principal investigator will be on the award. If a principal investigator has a joint appointment between the US institution and a foreign institution, but the US institution feels comfortable designating them as the PI and can assure that they have the capacity in their US institutional assignment to perform the terms of the NSF award, then they can be designated as the PI and it's not an issue. They do, however, have to disclose this dual appointment in the proposal.
Thank you. There's a question here that I'm going to try to interpret, and if I interpreted it incorrectly, if you could just try to retype that question for me. But it asks about the relationship between NSF funded, I believe it's asking about the relationship between NSF funded projects and the 17 global sustainable development goals.
Mm-hmm. So we've done a lot of work with the UN and with organizations such as the Carnegie Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation at coordinating between the SDGs and NSF funded research and showing how NSF funded research contributes to all 17 of those SDGs. However, we do not make that explicit connection in our research solicitations or in our funding calls or in any of our NSF requirements or program documents. And the reason why is because we feel so strongly that in fundamental and basic research, that you all as the researchers propose to us and propose your ideas to us. And so if you have a wonderful idea in research that is connected to the SDGs, send it to us, that's great, but we're not going to make that a requirement of you. The end result, of course, in this bottom-up type of approach that NSF has is that we've been able to do that mapping I told you about, but it happened organically. It happened that we are funding so many things in sustainability, in clean energy, in the environment, and will continue to do so, especially as this administration's priorities are climate change, clean energy, sustainability, as well as equality and diversity, which are inherent in the SDGs.
Thank you. Next question here. What if you are collaborating with scientists in a country that has different principles of research integrity? Can that compromise me?
So it will not compromise the selection of your research project. What we look at is when a research project is proposed to NSF and it has international collaborators, we look at two things for those international collaborators: how they contribute to the intellectual merit of the project, and then how do they contribute to the goals of broader impacts. So educational impacts, tangible impacts that come from the project, and how the international collaboration contributes to those. Now, that's because, of course, no one except you and your team can really assess the ethics and the values except for you all yourselves. And so it's a great responsibility that we all have and that international partners have to make sure that we're on the same page in that regard. That's a lot easier said than done, I have to say. And that's why it's really, really important to be able to answer those questions I talked about. As you notice, one of the questions I had was, is there a clear way to end the collaboration? That seems kind of negative, but it's really important. If you are finding through your research collaboration that your partner is not upholding the values and the principles that are extremely important to research integrity, there needs to be an exit strategy and a way to terminate that collaboration. And unfortunately, in a lot of these talent recruitment program contracts that I was talking about, only the other government can terminate the contract, and the US researcher can't. And to me, that certainly is a red flag. I have to say, though, no matter how much you write things down, things happen in practice. This big international project that I talked about, where there were huge disagreements, and we went to the OIG, they didn't write anything down. It's difficult to tell if they had written things down because of the prestige of the project, they still might have had these same issues. And a lot of that is kind of out of our control, but we have to do as much as we can in advance to have that common understanding.
Thank you. Let's go. Had one scrolled up a little bit. Let me get to it. All right. The question is, we've heard a lot about crackdown on US researchers collaborating with certain countries and allegations of scientific misconduct in the press that have been dropped. In other cases, the investigators thought that they had followed all of the disclosure guidelines, etc. What advice can you give to prevent that?
Sure. So I want to emphasize that we have, of course, the Department of Justice that takes criminal action, and NSF that takes what we call administrative action. And these are things like terminations of grants and debarments and suspensions. Both for Department of Justice and for us, there has to be due process. We have to go through months and months and months of investigation, gathering evidence, proving our case, even to take administrative action. So we're not interested, and I can assure you no one is interested in trapping anyone, in catching anyone by surprise. And we're not interested in simple administrative or clerical errors. That's why through the analytics that I mentioned, we're going to take that human side and look at everything to see what's really going on. The cases where, I can't speak for when DOJ takes action, but I could speak for when NSF takes administrative action. And we've taken administrative action when there have been patterns of misuse of federal funding, of non-disclosure, and of false statements. So a recent example is we had someone who had an NSF grant that was about $1.1 million. And they were even reporting to their US institution that they were at that US institution and they were performing the NSF research grant. It turns out they weren't. They weren't even in the United States. They were in another country, and they were working for another institution in that country without the knowledge of their US institution. And they were working on very, very similar research to what NSF was funding them to do, but using the other funding that they were provided. So that was a case of double dipping. It was a case of not telling anyone where someone is. And then they were filing, sorry, my dog is chewing on something. They were filing false reports to NSF about what they were supposedly doing using NSF funding. That's the kind of thing, of course, where we had to take action. Now, in that particular case, because it had gone so far down the road with all these false statements and not using the NSF funding appropriately, we had to terminate the grant at that time. And the US institution, unfortunately, had to return the funding to us. In many of the cases where we find issues like I was talking about, when we can, we want to transfer the grant to another principal investigator so that the graduate students and the junior faculty who are working on the grant can continue. That's extremely important to us. So my main message here is that this is not about clerical errors. This really is about patterns of behavior that are extremely concerning to us.
Thank you. The next question here from an anonymous attendee: should the collaborators of collaborators be reported to NSF?
So collaborators of collaborators do not have to be reported to NSF. Sub-awards and consultants where there's going to be NSF funding provided to those sub-awardees and those consultants, that does need to be reported to NSF, whether it's domestic or international. And then when there's that sub-award or that consultant, the description of what they're going to be doing is provided to NSF, we review it, and we provide approval. But collaborators of collaborators do not have to be reported.
Thank you. These two are kind of related. Are the guidelines you showed in your presentation listed somewhere accessible? And do you have advice on where and how to ensure an investigator is abiding by all of the guidelines?
Yeah, so this Hellmeyer Catechism is in the Jason report, which is on the website. I also have my slides that I'll provide to APS to send out to you all. Please disseminate them widely. Those questions are also going to be on our research security website for NSF. Now, if someone does not abide by what I wrote down, it is really important to have that termination strategy in there and to be able to terminate the collaboration. How you oversee whether people are playing by the rules is one of the hardest things. And it's something that I've been thinking about quite a bit overall for research security. So I think in research security, often there might be concerning things happening in a lab. And junior faculty and graduate students might know about those things, and they just don't feel comfortable speaking out. Often, you know, the senior researcher in a lab, they're prestigious, they're well known, nobody wants to speak out against them. And so I'm thinking about ways that we can set up some type of ombuds program in collaboration with some of the university associations, where there can be a person you can go to if you see something concerning. And it would be similar to the type of program that many of us have in place for sexual harassment. And I think that this type of ombuds could also be helpful for concerning behaviors that don't abide by the rules of a collaboration. That's the way that could kind of be at least addressed. How one ensures, though, that everyone is following the rules, I think is just really, really hard. And if anybody has any ideas about how we can do that better, I'm open to it. Really challenging.
Thank you very much. I think we might have time for one more question. So let's go with, for large international collaborations among countries, are there a few critical things you believe are absolutely essential to garnering success? For example, different governments approach budgeting differently, which can lead to confusion and misunderstanding over the course of a project. Thus, understanding one's partner's budget system can be key to ensuring the financial stability of the project.
Yeah, you know, I think that's a key one. And I think if you look, you have to understand both where funding is coming from as well as the stream of that funding. You do have to also understand clearly what other sources of funding your collaborator might have. I think what I see in large international collaborations to be the most important is to very well define from the beginning the roles and responsibilities of the different participants in the project. The most misunderstandings come from one person thinking they're the lead scientist, and maybe they're the lead US scientist, but the international partners never understood them to be the lead scientist for the whole project. And so those roles are incredibly important, and not just the roles, but what the responsibilities of those roles are. I think the second thing that I find the most challenging in international collaborations and that should be worked out in advance is, it goes back to this power structure here. The roles and responsibilities of graduate students and postdocs on international projects really varies between those participants in the US and those participants who might be on the project from other countries. And it leads to a lot of misunderstandings about the roles of those graduate students and postdocs, and also how their ideas and their intellectual capital is going to be used, and the credit or not that they're going to receive in publications and in other ways. So those kinds of things as well have to be worked out very clearly in an international collaboration. And then going back to budget, something that is with the timing of the budget cycle, we've found that often an international collaborator will be part of an NSF project. NSF will provide the funding in, say, August, and that international partner's funding isn't guaranteed until the following April. And that's something that, again, has to be very well understood from the beginning. A way that we try to work on that at NSF is with several countries in several programs, we have what's called lead agency agreements. And these lead agency agreements mean that we coordinate the funding and the data and the solicitation together, so that we agree we're going to release it in the US, the solicitation, and the UK is going to release it at the same time in the UK, and that we're going to provide funding at the exact same time. I would look for those lead agency agreement solicitations. There are several of them that come out per year, and that's a great way to do an international collaboration really easily if it fits with the international partner countries that you're working with.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today's webinar. So I want to say first a big thank you to Dr. Rebecca Keiser, and a thank you to all of our attendees today. If we didn't get to your question, I'd encourage you to follow up by email at webinars@aps.org, and we'll forward your question to Dr. Keiser, or if it's something we can answer, we'd be happy to do so. Once again, thank you, everyone, and I hope to see you at our next broadcast. American Physical Society, copyright 2021, all rights reserved.
Thank you so much.